Good morning, everyone. So excited to have you join us for this first episode of ECC Essentials of 2024. I was quoting a date last week and I still said 2023. So if you're still writing 2023, you are in good company or saying it. Um, we are here to talk about keeping your external passions alive. I am Halcyon Frank, Director of Training and Development with the Denise Amberly Foundation. If you are not familiar with the foundation, you can visit deniseamberly.org to learn more information, or feel free to reach out to myself. And today I am joined by my good friend, which really is a good friend. I feel like on some shows they say that, but he really is a good friend, Matt Harwell. And while you guys are joining, feel free to say hello in the chat, as well as let me know if you're in the Midwest, how many inches of snow you got, because that's what we talk about in the Midwest. And then let us know actually if you're going to be at SBP next week, because we will be there as well. So now I will hand it over to Matt to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Elsa. And yeah, it's an exciting snowy morning. I'm in the Midwest as well. And remember, I think they may have said it was way more snow than I feel like we got, but it's what it is. It's a snowy January morning. I'm excited to be here. Like Halcyon said, my name is Matt Harwell. I am a public safety dispatch supervisor with the Lincoln Emergency Communications Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm excited to be here and just really, really excited to kick off the year and kind of talk about the things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so we're starting a new year. We're all still exhausted from the last one, obviously. But one of the things, new year is like new goals, new me, all those things that come along with that. So for those of you who are maybe trying to reconnect with kind of your old hobbies, or just even continue to try to find that mythical work-life balance, hopefully we'll get some good stuff for you today. And like I said, we're talking about keeping your external passions alive. So Matt and I actually did a session regarding this topic at Nebraska this year. I had a good time, but I'm going to pass it back to you, Matt, and just ask you on a personal level, what kind of hobbies, things outside of work are you engaged in, and how do you personally keep that despite the overwhelm that work can have sometimes?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a great question. And I think this is like Halcyon said, we did a session on this, but it's one of the things we love to banter about because if there's one thing that Halcyon and a few other people in my life love to joke with me about is the fact that I love to volunteer. And we say that at kind of tongue in cheek, but the reality is for me, I do have some of those things that are at times connected to public safety, but at times not. But finding ways to just keep myself excited and engaged outside of dispatch. And I think really what it comes down to for me is, and I read this just the other day, and I'm going to read it to quote it correctly. I think it came from Authentic Leadership Inside the Mind of Dr. Patton, but it was this quote that really stuck out to me. And so it says, best career advice that I can give is don't ever attach yourself to a person, a place, a company, an organization, or project. Attach yourself to a mission, a calling, a purpose only. That's how you keep your power and your peace. And I think for me, that was really, it was rather captivating. It kind of just caused me to pause for a moment to recognize that too often, I think we become our job, especially in 911. We get so in deep that we forget who we are as people. And so for me, it's things that I try to do to combat that. And so some of those specific things, just for me in my life, I'm a wildland firefighter. I'm a reserve deputy. So those are some of the fun things. But even things with my former agency, some of the collateral duties were things like peer support, or being on our public information officer cadre, being on the SWAT team. And so just finding ways, even if they're kind of peripheral to what we do in 911, but still finding ways to keep ourselves charged up. Beyond that, I love music. I love to be outdoors. I love to hike. I love to run. And I think we talk about those sometimes as hobbies, but even last night, I was talking to a coworker who it sounds like so much of his hobby, this person loves to read. But the only time they read is at work. And so again, I was struck with what if our hobbies are, we only do our hobbies when we're at work too. And then it just, all this weird cross pollination of what are we doing to keep ourselves fueled outside of the communication center? So I don't know if that helps kick it off and what you're looking for.
Yeah, no. And I know I was listening to a podcast on, I want to say it was a Huberman Labs, but I could be wrong. And I have like texted you immediately because one of the things that the gal on that had brought up, I think she was a dancer maybe, and she got injured and she couldn't dance. And this had been like her whole life. And I loved how she summed it up. And it's kind of another way to sum up the quote that you shared is kind of attach yourself to why it is you do what you do and not what it is you do what you do. So for me, even coming out of the center, not being full time, there were days where I kind of struggled with like, oh man, what am I going to do? And I, you know, for those joining live, it's easier to kind of pick on you for those listening to the recording. And I don't want to pick on Amy, but I know that she's kind of fresh out of the center as well. And so I've kind of talked to her a little bit when I saw her last fall about what that feels like, because it is such a difference. And I think that that's when we really get into trouble, is if we ever find ourselves in a circumstance where we're no longer in the center or no longer in the role that we were used to, because we've attached ourselves to what it is we do and not why we do what we do. So I want to serve, I want to help people. And so I think I found a good way to do that in my current role, instead of just being so like, oh, I'm a dispatcher, I work in 911. Now it's, oh, I help people. I try to find ways to serve people. And that opens the doors up as well too for all kinds of things that I could do. Like I could volunteer all the time, like you do, Matt. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, and I think, and I, again, for those of you who don't know, Halcyon, like you said, good friends. And so for us, it is a joking thing. But I mean, yeah, beyond that, honestly, too, is like I'm a lifelong learner. And a lot of people say that, but like for me, working on a doctorate, and just having some of those things too, to find ways to keep myself charged, so that even when it comes to like reading books, I do love to read. It it has other purposes, so it holds me accountable. I get a lot of time on the road now with some different commutes, and so even I was telling someone recently, like it's great. The type of literature I normally like to read is like historical, more autobiographies, biography type stuff. But that's like not the best when I'm driving for long stretches of time to like keep me engaged. So finding other things, and so it's fun and a neat way to find those creative passions. Um, at Lincoln, we have just prior to my starting with the communication center, we had someone who I believe she had worked with Lincoln Police Department for like decades, 3 or 4 maybe. Um, and I never knew her personally, but yesterday she stopped by the communication center, and so I was able to go up and introduce myself, and it was really, it struck me. Something she said was, as we were talking, I said, I've only heard great things about you. Your reputation kind of precedes you, the normal things. And but she was sharing how much she's loving retirement. But she was very clear to note she had gotten to a point in her career in public safety. And again, she had held a few different roles within the police department. But she said, I really had lost myself because she was focused so much on the job or the tasks of the job and not so much about the why she was in that. And so exactly what you're saying, I think, is huge. And some of the like over in the chat, Amy's even bringing up, like, sadly, that sometimes means when we don't have the job, like you're talking about the dancer, or we retire from a job, we have to find ourselves again. And that's what this person was saying too, is it's been fun being away. She's had to re-understand who she is as a person, and what are her interests. And I think the biggest reality is, Halcyon and I have talked about this before, and I think the thing that is sometimes saddening to us is when people lose themselves into the job. The potential is that if they lose the job, do they even know who they are as a person? And then what does that mean for them in their life? And that's a sad reality.
So really quickly, we're new to this Zoom platform. So those of you watching live, I think I launched a poll. If it popped up in your screen, I apologize. I didn't mean to distract from Matt's beautiful face.
It's all right.
But we do have a poll. So side note, if you want to fill that in. And also, I think, Matt, if it works for you too, in the chat, besides time, because time is always the enemy, it feels like, for anything we want to do, period, and money, because some hobbies are expensive. But what is the biggest obstacles that you guys find when it comes to actually engaging in those hobbies or those other activities that you used to do outside of work that maybe either because you become so ingrained in 911 and emergency communications, or just because you find yourself doing a lot of stuff related to work that you maybe don't engage in now? So we'll see what people have to say for that. Oh, good. The poll worked. Again, this is a new platform, so you're all testing things out with us. So if you're watching the recording or listening to the audio, you're also part of our kind of testing audience. So it looks like it's kind of a split almost. So almost half say they still regularly participate in hobbies they enjoy. 25% said sometimes. 33% said hardly ever. And then what's your favorite activity? I can't see answered right now, but we'll definitely take a look at those. Just going to go ahead and end the poll for now. And then, oh, it looks like I can share results. Sorry, Matt, you're
Oh,
just
there we
along for
go.
the ride.
I
Okay,
know. I
view
was
details.
like, this is fun.
Yeah. So we had more family time as favorite activity, nature photography, spending time on our farm, garden, crocheting, knitting, photography, exercise, spending time with grandkids, crafting. As someone whose parents live on an acreage and have animals, if that's your thing, I very much encourage you to find a place to go do that because it definitely is a nice break from the kind of hustle and bustle. But let's see here. So, overtime, obviously, kind of takes all the time and mental energy. Um,
Yeah.
so finding something slower paced, I think that's almost huge. Is I don't want to say decompression in the sense of like a mental health decompression, but just a like, I love trashy reality TV, Real Housewives of almost every city. Um, and we might have talked about this before, like just in conversation. But one of the things I think that why I enjoy it, because it's like, do they have real problems as human beings? Of course. But so often does that show on center on these like petty, unimportant problems? Absolutely. And so it's easy to like disconnect from like, oh, I just did CPR on the phone. Let's focus on why you're mad at her because she said something you didn't like.
True. 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 Well, and I think too is like finding those ways, and I think that's really good is finding those ways. And several people have said this. You were talking about even with the acreage with the animals, and I know Gina. If any of you know Gina, she oftentimes posts some of these pictures being in Western Colorado that are just extremely gorgeous sunsets and just all of the beauty that's around the part of the country she lives in is finding those intentional ways to have the mental break, right? And I know we talk about it, like even in the center, we teach ourselves and we work with ourselves of like, you take that really tough call. What does it look like to give yourself that little bit of space to disconnect and then re-engage in what you're doing, or even if it's a short walk or a break or whatever. But I think sometimes it's the bigger reality of the cumulative stress. It's not always just those big calls that we take, but it's really the everyday, like some people have said, the overtime, just the long shifts, the lack of staffing or the staffing issues, retention issues, all these different things, right? That we talk about, which then means we don't get as much training as we want or professional development at times. And it's just a myriad of issues. But ultimately, all of that piles up on us. And I think then when we don't allow ourselves this more intentional break from that, it's constantly running in our mind. And another comment that Gina kind of pointed out is, or a reality is talking about how do we turn off that work brain? And sometimes I think it's not so much about and this is going to get maybe a little touchy feely. It's not always just the work brain, but it's kind of like our work heart. Is that it's not just the cognitive thing, but it's some of that emotional drain. And so finding ways to get ourselves charged up, even like emotionally, some of those warm, fuzzy things, so that we don't get so focused on like, well, as long as I go out into nature, I'm gonna blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So it's not just this cognitive exercise, but it's really about our whole person.
I think, and the like one word you like said that I think is super, super important, no matter what you do, And I know people have probably heard it. It's probably not new information, but it's a good reminder, like even for myself, and I'm sure you, Matt, is intentional. So people are like, it's hard to find time. My brain is dead. Totally agree. I don't have kids. So I can't imagine having kids because I can barely take care of myself. So I can't imagine what that's like. Like,
You
how do
have
you do it,
dogs and
Matt?
nieces, nephews. I mean,
Well, yeah, but
you've got
like,
small people and small things you care for.
yes. But my schedule is my own, much more than those who have children, especially little children. Um, but I think intentionality can apply no matter what, even when you're volunteering all the time, even when you're a wife and a mother. If you put the intention to take the 5 minutes, to take the 10 minutes, to take whatever it is, it will go so much further. Like you said, you can go out in nature, you can go for a 5 mile hike. But if you're spending that hike thinking about work and thinking about all the things you need to do, it won't probably be as good as if you take an intentional 5 to 10 minutes to just breathe and sit there and do an activity that you like, or maybe do some kind of like mindless activity, if you will. So I think intention is huge.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that word. I'm a pretty big fan of the word, just being intentional. And for me, that's something that I try to be. It's being intentional, but it's also being really purposeful, right? Because we do have to recognize that the intention and the purpose behind those short snippets of time is that you really want to just kind of jump in full bore. And so finding the ability to like just really invest in that time and stuff. Um, and I think if you don't mind, Tasha, and I'm just looking at some of these
Oh, you're
comments that
good.
people threw in earlier, and back to Erica was saying about, schedule having the day off, that you can meet up, making time for those like other avenues in life, wife, mother, that someone said. But one that really struck me is about just being tired and not wanting to leave the house, even when I can. And I think, again, too, that is something that some of this is not so much always just about the hobbies or the activities that you have or the passions that you may have, but it's also about those people that you're surrounded with and how they can maybe even pull you out when you don't necessarily want to leave the house. And not, some people definitely get charged up by having that alone time. So I don't want to like make this awkward or tread in that regard. But again, like, what does that look like to some of those personal external passions are about the people? And I think, again, it's recognizing that we don't want all of our friendships and our relationships and like the people that we choose to spend our time with. Sometimes it's good to have a little bit different set of people outside of work too. And so what does that look like, and how do you keep, or to be able, even if they are work friends, to be intentional, again, to recognize, because Hassan and I work friends, we enjoy hanging out with our group of friends outside of work. But I think sometimes we are rather intentional about not talking work stuff, like just talking life, just having fun and being in those situations where it's not, we can really draw ourselves away from work. And I think that's one of the big things that we want to make sure people are mindful of. We're going into a new year, like you said. And so what does this look like to set ourselves up for success and make the trajectory in 2024 or 2023, if you're still writing that, into 2024, very, very high, right?
Yeah. I know this is going to sound really cheesy and again, probably been said before, but I was just having a conversation with a friend this morning, because there's like 5 inches of snow on the ground here. And unfortunately, because I work from home, there is no snow though between the commute from my bed to my desk. So I have to go to work, which is very unfortunate in my opinion. But I was just telling her, again, it's an intentional thing. As great as it sounds to like, oh, I can work from home, I can work from my, my pajamas, I have to change my clothes or else I'll kind of stay in that like sleep mindset. And I think sometimes thinking back to like on my days off, especially when I was working overnights, because then you really don't want to go to bed or like go outside your, home. I think even simple acts like that, like if I just change my clothes and like get ready for the day, will I leave my house? Maybe not, but will I put myself that much closer to leaving my house? Yes, because I have one less excuse. If you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear, done any kind of research on habits, one of the things they talk about is removing all the obstacles. So that's why they say to lay your gym clothes out, you'll be that much more likely to go to the gym. Um, the easier we make it. So just even, if your hobby is to craft and you feel like you're not finding time for it, Hopefully you can find the time to maybe go to a craft store, pick up a new kit of something. Because if there's nothing in your house to craft with and you're tired and you're run down, you're not going to do it. But if you can take the few steps to integrate it, if you will, or make it more likely because it's right in front of you, much more likely to happen.
Yeah. And just for if people are willing, I know we've had some good conversation in the chat. Like, what are some of the things thinking of being purposeful and intentional, and that if people are willing to throw into the chat just to keep the conversation going, what are some of the things you all do in your lives to really ensure that you're being intentional? So share some of those things. I think what Hassan said is huge. Just even and you've heard it before, and I think it comes like there's some author, I think he had a military background, but even the like waking up and making your bed, right? So just making some patterns and habits in your life that get you that much closer to like going to do something you enjoy. It also means, I think, at times too, that you set yourself up for success even when you do come home and you are really run down and you need to recharge. You're also not stressed about all the things in your to-do list, maybe around your space, because you took some of that time and worked through those things. So finding ways, and again, it's not about trying to get everything on the schedule and then just feeling that much more stressed out, right? And I think Ali or someone threw this in the chat earlier, is like, by the time I get home with overtime and all these other things that I feel like all of that free time is sucked out of my life, what does this look like? You're not going to be able to over schedule, right? Because sometimes you want to have that free space in your schedule, in that regard too. But yeah, what are some of the things that you, others of you watching live, have done when it comes to be intentional, if you don't mind sharing?
Some good responses already. I like Allie, have a gratitude app that sends daily reminders to find specific things to be grateful for. Doing dishes every single day. Dishes are the bane of my existence, but I don't disagree.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Yeah, the app thing, and I think that's the reality, is we have, it's 2024, right? We live in a time where we have so many tools, but I also would challenge people to what Ali's saying is, if you find those apps, but don't get like 15 apps where
Right.
you're getting gratitude in 15 different streams, and like find the things that are good. Like if it's the best calendar app, the best to-do list app, like keep yourself like, I think I'm guilty where I end up having like 12 apps to do the same thing. And then I'm like wasting time trying to figure out which one I really like the best always, or trying to juggle between a whole bunch of other things. So, and I like some of
Well,
these other things like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and with that too, if you have like 15 notifications coming at you, like New Year, everybody's trying to do new habits, start with one thing. Because if you have 15 notifications coming at you at one time, you will start to ignore them. And then eventually you've just trained yourself to ignore all of them. So not overloading yourself either, because you'll just train yourself to ignore it all.
Yeah, no, these are great things. Thanks for sharing, those of you who are attending live. And I think one thing too, if people are watching this later too, is just maybe find a way to share this with your coworkers, or share this with your family, your friends, whatever, of just finding like, okay, so you weren't maybe here, but what are some of these things that you just want to like be intentional about? And oftentimes for me, when I'm sharing them with people, then they end up holding me accountable. And I think that's a huge piece of it too, is like, like Amy said, like to just get up, take a shower, get dressed before, you're taking your kids to school. Otherwise, when you get home, you just want to go back to bed. So what are those things? Like maybe it's even asking our kids like that kind of gentle reminder of like, hey, before you take your kids to school, are you like dressed for the day? And your kids just calling out if you're not.
Yeah, and I like Angela said, just do one thing, which I think is also kind of a theme through some of these other answers. Like Gina, I do make my bed every morning. I feel like I've accomplished. So even if Gina has the worst day ever and she feels like she did nothing else, she can still come back and be like, but my bed is made. And there is nothing more inviting or more comforting than a nice made bed, especially after a terrible day. But it's just one thing. And I know we're kind of going into like a habit conversation as well as like that. But I think that there's so much like in common between those things, because we kind of do have to make a habit of, what we want to do outside of work. Not that we're doing it the same time every day for the same length or something like that, but we have to build it into our routines. And Erica has her routines with her dogs every morning, which if you haven't seen her dogs, they're super adorable. And without them, I would probably not get up and moving on my days off. Definitely not saying like, yeah, if you can't get out of bed, get a dog. Like you don't have to do that. but I can also attest they're a great motivator to get out of bed when they need to go outside.
It's true, right? Well, and I think, and one of the things just to kind of circle back and as we near the end of the half hour and stuff is I think one of the things that House and I were really just excited about sharing, if I'm incorrect, correct me, House, but like
I will.
it's true, is it's a new year, but we're recovering from the old year. And I think if there's one thing I saw this year that was different than the past few years was more and more people were sharing what they're excited about in 2024, but also sharing some of their woes and stuff from 2023. And I don't know if that was just because we feel more comfortable with the people that we've surrounded ourselves with, or we're finally in a time and an era where we feel like more willing to be vulnerable with the people that we connect with in social media. But people were sharing like what were those things that they were like recovering from, those things that were leading them to burnout and stuff. And so putting that out there, and I think what we really wanted to just challenge everyone, and yes, the habits conversation has been great and stuff, I love it, but it's to just recognize like 2023 may be over, but it still has had an impact on us. And so as we really charge into 2024, we want you guys to all thrive and to like be your best. And I think that's what we deserve. And that's part of the why for so many of us, why we're in public safety is, if you ask most people, it's like, I just want to serve. But we lose sight of that because we lose ourselves. And so getting back to just the foundational heart of why you're doing what you're doing at the beginning of the year. So even if you've already failed at all your resolutions, you haven't made the workouts, you have eaten like crap, whatever it may be, the recognition of like the one thing you can still do is challenge yourself to get back to the heart of like, why am I doing this? And like, what are those external passions that maybe I totally let go in 2023? And maybe it's regaining those. So if it is fitness, that's great. But I think sometimes when we try to add something totally new into the new year, we kind of set ourselves up for failure. But if it's something we used to enjoy doing and we're just adding that back in, we might be a little bit more successful, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. And just to kind of build off of that, your passions outside of work may ebb, flow over time, and maybe you just have to adjust a little bit as well. I just think like I really enjoy reading, but I'll be honest, I don't make the time. Also, feel like I have the time necessarily always to just sit down and read a book. And so then it becomes I listen to an audiobook. And when I'm driving, or maybe I am just kind of hanging out, working on something that doesn't take a lot of focus. So I put the audiobook on. So also making sure that we're having the patience with ourselves and the kindness with ourselves that even if we said like, oh, my hobby is, underwater basket weaving, maybe because of your current season of life, you have to do just basket weaving. You don't get to go underwater for it. But they definitely can ebb and flow. So don't hold yourself to like, nope, this was my hobby. I gotta go. No, you can do whatever you want. You're an adult. You can literally do whatever we want. I know most of us just want to go to bed, but you can literally do whatever you want as long as
Yeah,
it's legal.
yes, very true. And this kind of something that's fun. And I think as we look at the industry of 911 in general is what does it look like if we all, those of us who are here live, those of us who are here after the fact, what would it look like if we challenged ourselves in 2024 when we're at conferences? We end up seeing a lot of each other face to face at conferences of if we were to find time, even in the midst of the busyness of a conference, to be like, I'm going to find someone who has a similar hobby and we're going to like do our hobby while we're at a conference. And I don't know, maybe that's something that is fun for you and even to challenge your staff. I know Gina earlier said like, I'm not going to be at this place, but someone from my team's going to be there. Is finding ways to like encourage our team members as they go to conferences to be like, hey, how did you also invest in yourself a little bit or give back to yourself while you were at a conference? Or how did you meet someone with a similar hobby and, or find a new hobby too, right? Again, maybe it is finding something new because you're so far removed from the things you've done, and that ebb and flow that you were talking about is like, shoot, I live in a new state or a new city or a new town, and the things I used to enjoy doing, I don't have as much access to, but I'm going to find something different.
Yeah, I just think like last year SBP or be the difference. I played cards with like Karen Marquez, Lee Hornacek, and my mom was at BTD. And so we're all playing cards and we're still networking, we're talking to people, we're talking about the day, but we found this way to kind of also relax too, and play cards. But we've hit the half an hour mark. So for those of you watching live, want to be respectful of your time. This, I think, has been a good conversation. I do like what Angela said, put something in your calendar. One, because that's helpful in general, but two, because I think even if you don't dedicate that hour to it, maybe that's in your calendar, you're more likely, again, to even do something. Maybe Ali said maybe Matt can teach me how to actually enjoy running enough to make it a hobby. Good luck with that. As we wrap up though, Matt, do you have any kind of final thoughts?
No, I think one of the big things is, I think that quote I shared and just the reality of like, find ways to recharge yourself so you can be the best professional. As we go into 2024 as 911 professionals, we're still constantly fighting for the recognition that we are first responders, that we are truly members of the public safety community. And I think finding ways to really recharge ourselves allows us to be better professionals. And I think that's something that might help tip the scale in that regard. So there's just so much to investing in ourselves sometimes that impacts the bigger picture.
Yeah, there's a phrase, I think they say it with like relationships. I have to be a better me so we can be a better we. But I think that applies to work relationships and your work team. I have to be a better me so we can be a better we. Um, Thank you all for attending live. Thank you, Amy. I'm glad you wanted to see our face. Not many people do. Like I mentioned, we will be at SBP next week, so looking forward to seeing any of you who will be there. We also have Be the Difference coming up at the end of the month, the Foundation's annual conference happening in Knoxville. There is still a few spots left, so hoping to see as many of you there as we can. Next 2 weeks, excuse me, so new time in day for the year for ECC Essentials. It'll now be every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, trying out a new time slot, but we'll still be uploading the audio and recording. So 2 weeks from now, we will be back with Tina Bonetta out of Colorado, talking about hiring. Her agency has been able to do some really good stuff when it comes to hiring, as well as many other agencies. But we will be talking to her about that topic. And we look forward to seeing you guys all there. So enjoy your rest of your week, and we will see you next time.
See you, friends.